Chapter 12. Memnarch strapped himself into his infusion device and watched the red pinpricks of light float over his body. Funneling the mana, the magical process commenced. His skin flushed and he felt a familiar fire as the serum burned away the ignorance from his body. The fires he felt would purify him, make him stronger, so that he may be a better servant to his master. His head buzzed with the pain, and his eyes filled with tears. The light pulsing in from the mana core coalesced as it always did with the first infusion of the morning. And there, arrayed before the guardian of Mirrodin, was a vision of the creator himself, Khan. "Master, you have come!" The vision did not say a word. It wavered in the middle of Memnarch's laboratory, drifting above the floor as if it were a ghost of a liquid metal planeswalker. "Memnarch has been so lonely and afraid. It has been so long since your last visit. Memnarch fears you will never return. This place, this plane you created is beautiful and wondrous. You have truly provided anything a guardian could desire." Memnarch dropped his head. "Except companions. Memnarch had to bring them here himself. All the creatures except Memnarch himself, of course. Every one of them was brought here by my soul traps. At first, Memnarch only wanted subjects to experiment with. He wanted to see what made them tick. But now, Memnarch knows why they work. He has observed their habits, catalogued them all. And he cannot say that the work has been unrewarding. Those who seek knowledge find solace in discovery." Memnarch stared at the vision. Though the experiments continue, Memnarch still lacks a companion. He continued his conversation with Khan. "Memnarch has even tried to make the creatures here understand him. The one he calls Pontifex has been here to see Memnarch many times. Many times. If Memnarch wished it, this one would stay here in the Panopticon, would stay with Memnarch forever. But that is not what Memnarch wants. These creatures they do not understand. They do not have the capacity for emotion." Memnarch looked up at where the eyes should be in the ghostly image before him. "They are instinctual and predatory, but that is all. They tear each other apart so that they may simply survive another day. Oh, they fooled Memnarch for some time. The systems and rituals they have created seem sophisticated, very sophisticated indeed, but upon further study, these complex systems that Memnarch has watched had hoped would show an understanding, a level of higher intelligence and emotion, have proven just the opposite. These creatures, the poor, pathetic vermin who populate this plane, your plane, they are nothing to Memnarch. There is no hope of finding a companion among them. They are incapable of love, incapable of providing Memnarch with what he needs." The Guardian sighed. "Memnarch has even tried to build a companion. You have seen Malil." Memnarch chuckled. Yes. He does look like Memnarch once did. A tribute to you, Lord Khan, and a hope that Memnarch could get what he lacked from a creature just like himself. But it did not work. Though Malil looks like Memnarch, Malil is not Memnarch. No. He's a good servant, but he does not suit Memnarch. True, he will do whatever I say without argument. Perhaps that is the problem. Perhaps Memnarch needs conflict in his life." The Guardian shook his head. "No, there is plenty of conflict in Mirrodin. Memnarch has seen to that. It is something else, something lacking." Memnarch stopped talking as the serum hit the inside of his brain. The fire spread through his skull, and all capacity to speak was taken from him. Then the burning turned to a throb, and he resumed his conversation. "Forgive Memnarch," he said, feeling a wave of exhilaration run up his spine, making him stronger, smarter, more confident. "But your creation needs you. Memnarch needs your attention, your companionship, your love." The articulated arms withdrew, and the infusion device reset itself, unlatching him. Why do you stay away? Why do you not give Memnarch what he needs? Memnarch pushed aside the arm straps and stepped from the device. Why do you not talk to Memnarch when he asks for you? The Guardian blinked his eyes. Several of them cleared of tears, and the ghostly image in the middle of the laboratory faded. Memnarch closed the eyes with the clearest view. The image of Khan returned through the blurry eyes, but only partially. Do not go, master, he said, ambling forward on his 4 spindly metal limbs. He squinted, trying to bring the vision into focus, but by squeezing his eyes closed, he forced the remaining tears from them, and the image of Khan vanished. No, do not leave, Memnarch. You have been gone too long. You will return at once. Memnarch spun, looking all about his laboratory for signs that the creator had returned. Do you hear me? I said. Do you hear me? There was no answer. Memnarch let out a wail. Inside, he was alone. In this laboratory, he was alone. On all of Mirrodin, he was alone. Sadness welled up in his chest. It felt as if a heavy weight had been placed on top of him, one he couldn't see or ever remove. He had chased the creator away. Today it had been his harsh words. Before it had been his devotion to his mission, his blind loyalty to do whatever it was that his creator had asked. He would have done anything for Khan. He did everything the master had asked of him. But when he had done those things, it had been because he wanted companionship and attention from his creator. When he had been given the role of guardian, he thought it would bring him praise and acknowledgement from Khan. Instead, it had left him alone, stranded here on a dying Mirrodin, as his body devolved into flesh. The sadness in his breast turned to anger. With his powerful legs, he kicked over a table, sending beakers and scientific equipment skidding across the floor. Those items that didn't break in the fall, Memnarch hunted down, stepping on each and every one of them until they were broken into tiny shards. Those things he couldn't break, he crushed, smashing them down under all of his weight until they were flat. Next, he turned to the window that looked out over the interior of Mirrodin. Lifting the turned-over table into the air, he hurled it with all his might. Its 4 legs collided with the glass. The entire pane shattered, turning the window into a billion slivers, each one looking like a diamond. They fell like raindrops, some of them following a table as it plummeted to the ground below. Even this did not satisfy the anger in his heart. Memnarch spun and grabbed one of his articulated arms on the infusion device. His own arms were small and scrawny in comparison to his enhanced legs, but they held much strength, and he reeled back, ripping the appendage from this device. Sparks cascaded from the broken limb. Bits of broken metal dropped down to the ground with a metallic ring. Without hesitation, Memnarch lifted the shorn arm over his head. It bent at the joint, no longer held in place by hydraulics. The Guardian whipped it forward, thrashing it at the control unit of his infusion device. The arm's tip whipped over as the arm came down. The point connected with the controls, burying itself deep within the panel. Memnarch pulled it back for another strike, but the sharp edge stuck inside the device held firm. The Guardian let out a roar as he yanked again, and the arm snapped, half staying lodged in the controls, the other half coming away in Memnarch's hand. Again, the broken limb came up over Memnarch's shoulder, and again it came down on the device. The Guardian wailed as he pummeled and pummeled some more. Metal bent, sparks flew, and the machinery withered and died under the assault. With another strike, the serum tanks exploded, flooding the floor of the laboratory with viscous, milky white liquid. With the next, the power supply was torn out, and the device went dark. Still, Memnarch didn't stop his attacks. Wielding the arm like a flail, he beat this creation until it was nothing more than a smoking pile of rubble. Standing over the ruined device, he looked down, catching his breath, and contemplating the impact of his rage. After a moment, he closed his eyes and let the arm drop to the floor. What have I done? Pontifex entered the synod chamber. Far below, Sodador and Tyrell paced the empty floor. Orland, by contrast, reclined on a padded lounger, a new addition to the council hall. The long curved walls were silent. The packed crowd that had filled the viewing platforms watching the previous proceeding had not been invited to this meeting. Save for the 4 Vidalcan councillors, the room was empty. Lord Pontifex, we've been waiting for you for some time now. Pontifex leaned against the railing and looked down at the tiny Vidalcan below. The height made him feel bigger than life. How he wished he were really that large. He would reach out his boots and smash the others into jelly. He shook himself from his reverie. Yes, I'm sure you have. Orland stood up from his lounger. Please, come down and join us. We have much to discuss. Pontifex brushed aside the invitation with a wave of his hand. I prefer to stand here, thank you. Tyrell tossed something to the floor in disgust. Really, Pontifex, your disrespect for this assembly. Orland put his hand on the councillor's shoulder, silencing him. Lord Pontifex has every right to stand where he wishes. We can accommodate his antics. Pontifex nodded his approval, though inside he bristled. He lifted himself into the most regal pose he could muster. Lord Pontifex had never committed an antic in his life. Fine, fine. Perhaps Pontifex would be so kind as to explain his actions to the council. Pontifex put his hand onto his chest. Whatever do you mean? You know full well what I mean. You threatened a member of the council. Orland looked away. I did no such thing, said Pontifex. Sodador slammed his cane into the hard floor. What sort of fools do you take us for, Pontifex? Pontifex chuckled. Are there different sorts of fools? I was under the impression that there was only one, Sodador. This may be all very amusing for you, Pontifex, Tyrell shouted. The chamber amplified the sound, making it boom off the walls and echo off the hall. But we take the rulership of the Vidalcan people very seriously. As do I, said Pontifex in a calm voice. I think not. You've always been focused on your own personal gain, impetuously ignoring the will and well-being of the Vidalcan people, said Sodador. The will of the Vidalcan people, replied Pontifex. Since when have the Vidalcan people had a will? Might I remind you, councillors, that the Vidalcan Empire is not... Pontifex paused as the words he was about to say tasted bad in his mouth. Ruled by the people. Ah, but it could be, interjected Orland. Yes. Pontifex laughed. Then why stop there? Why not just dissolve the government altogether? One step at a time, Lord Pontifex, one step at a time, said Orland. Though the Vidalcan lord could hear every word spoken inside the meeting hall, he was too far from the floor to see the look on Orland's face. Pontifex felt certain that the newest councillor to this island was smiling from ear to ear. The Empire ruled by the people? Were these buffoons serious? Are you mad? Said Pontifex. You're talking about Vidalcan ruling themselves. Precisely, said Orland. Do you have any idea what sort of mayhem would ensue? Orland went back to his lounger. What you call mayhem, Lord Pontifex, others call freedom. Pontifex was flabbergasted. Freedom? Aside from the members of this synod, there are few creatures on this plane who could even handle such a responsibility. Frankly, I have my doubts about you three. Your objections have been noted, said Tyrell, but we are departing from the topic here. Oh! Pontifex rolled his neck, trying to relieve the frustration he felt from having to deal with such imbeciles. And what is the topic of today's meeting? Sodador slammed his cane into the ground once again. Your inexcusable behaviour towards another council member. Pontifex again feigned surprise. My behaviour? I have done nothing even approaching inexcusable. Then perhaps you'll explain your actions towards Councillor Orland. I believe you grabbed him by the collar and threatened him, said Sodador. Sodador looked at Orland, who was now looking at the floor. Then he turned his gaze back up at Pontifex. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Pontifex looked down at Orland. The young idealist had run to Tyrell and Sudador as soon as they had arrived home. The newest councillor talked tough, but had no temperament for real violence. This was a good thing to know.
"Why, Orland," he said, "if the fighting out on the plains was going to make you so uncomfortable, I never would have agreed to bring you along."
He rolled his fingers over the railing, gripping it tight.
"The battlefield is no place for a soft politician."
Sudador and Tyrell looked at Orland. He shrugged.
"Lord Pontifex," said Tyrell, turning away from the other two, "are you denying that you threatened Councillor Orland?" "Threaten Orland?"
Pontifex put both hands on his chest, appearing to be affronted by the notion.
"Why, Orland, is that what you've been saying? That I threatened you? And to think, all I was trying to do was keep you safe from harm's way."
"Don't you play your games with us, Pontifex," shouted Sodador.
"You've been opposed to having a fourth member for the Synod since you were disposed of Janus. This council has always been ruled by fear and deception, but we're not having that anymore. The days of backstabbing and corruption are over. It's time we did things a new way." "How very admirable," replied the Vidalcan lord.
"Things are going to change, Pontifex, whether you like it or not." Lord Pontifex lifted his cape, wrapping it up around his shoulder.
"We shall see."
He turned and exited the assembly hall. The rolling hills that had seemed to go on and on as they would never end finally began to flatten out. The interconnected hexagonal metal plays of Mirrodin's plains gave way to a mass of corrupted and tarnished tubes, pipes, and vines. To Glisser it looked much like a maligned and twisted version of the Tangle. Chimneys rose from the ground, belching smoke, like trees. They had branches and spikes reaching for the sky, but where these same sorts of gropes would be whole and green in the Tangle, those of the dross were riddled with holes and black with decay. Here, too, everything was shorter. The first time she had been here, Glisser had felt very tall, but she and her companions entered the darkened area. She realized the viscous mucus covering the ground, gobbling up the first few feet of everything growing from the earth. Nothing here was shorter than in the Tangle. It just appeared that way because everything was partially covered by the swampy liquid. The convergent moons of Mirrodin had gone down long ago, leaving the Glimmer Void in complete darkness. Brenna and the few wizards who hadn't returned to Medev had cast several small light spells to guide the way into the Mephedros, but when they arrived the magic was no longer necessary. Inside the oily swamp hundreds of tiny green lights flickered. The resulting ghastly glow didn't light up the night sky, but it did illuminate the outline of the trees and bush. Eerie shadows played over the surface of the thick liquid as the pinpricks of light moved around, covering the dross in a squirming veil of motion. If it was the ghosts of all who had lived and passed on were haunting this place, and it set the small hairs on the back of Glisser's neck on edge. "What makes those lights?" asked the elf. Brenna shrugged. "I do not know. Until now I've made it a point in my life to stay out of this place."
"Good thinking," said Slowbad. "Slowbad don't like dross, huh? Give goblins creeps."
The gentle wind blew out of the swamp, bringing with it the rancid smell of rotting flesh and the light rustling sound. Glisser stopped just at the edge of the goopy liquid. "I think we should stop for the night. Who knows if we'll find a dry place to camp once we enter."
"Good," said the goblin. "Longer we stay out, better, huh?"
Glisser bent down next to the goblin. "In the Tangle there are bugs that give off a glow like that. We call them fire beetles." Slowbad narrowed his eyes, looking deeper into the green-lit swamp.
"Crazy, you think those lights are bugs?"
Glisser shrugged. "Could be." Slowbad grabbed his chin, then, after a moment of thought, shook his head.
"Nah," he said. "Slowbad don't want beetles, huh? Happy you're out here."
Glisser laughed. "Okay, then." She unhitched her sword from her belt and sat down on the ground. "This is as good a place as any." Bosh sat down beside Glisser. Al-Hayat curled up not far away and began licking his wounds. Slobad found a soft spot in the wolf's fur, rolling into a ball and falling asleep within a matter of seconds. The goblin's soft snoring could be heard over the rustling swamp wind. Brenna placed her hand on Gus's shoulder. We will set some wards to warn us of danger. Better to get a good night of rest, knowing we won't be eaten while we sleep. Good idea, Gus nodded. Thank you, Brenna. Brenna and her wizards took off into the darkness. Gus turned to Bosh. I haven't heard much from you lately. How you holding up? Bosh looked down at the elf. I have been better. He held out his hand. Several long wounds crisscrossed his palm and knuckles. Scabs were forming on the older ones, but a few still seeped blood when he moved his fingers. Bosh, she said, grabbing hold of his hand. Did they hurt? Some, replied the golem. She touched one of the scabs and Bosh winced. Gussa pulled in the air through her gritted teeth, sympathizing with his newfound pain. You've got to learn how to avoid getting hurt so much. I am trying, he admitted. When the Vidalcan attacked, my first thought was to pick you all up and run through the razor grass. He pulled his hand away to poke at the new fleshy patch along his chest and down where the elf would have a ribcage. I remembered, so I stayed put. We had nowhere else to go, and we had to fight. He gave his hand back to the elf. What should I have done differently? Well, to begin with, you need to avoid their weapons as much as possible. Part of fighting is learn to defend yourself. You can't just rely on your metal hide to keep you safe from harm. You have to move, make yourself less of a target. What else? Gissa thought for a moment. She had to put herself in his place. Think like a metal golem. Then she could tell him how to think differently. Okay, she said, having thought of something. Smashing stuff. I like smashing stuff, said Bosh. I know, but that's a problem. But I like smashing stuff. Gussa laughed. Yes, I know, you don't have to stop altogether, but you need to make sure that what you smash isn't going to hurt you. Nothing hurt me before. That's the difference. The Dalkan who are carrying weapons will hurt you when you smash them. Bosh shook his head. I do not like being fleshy. No. Gussa examined the fresh wound across the top of her hand. It was scabbing up. Sometimes neither do I. She looked back at Bosh's hand. But there is one good thing. What? Gussa pointed to the scabs on the golem's hand. Now you heal. Bosh lifted his palms to his face. He examined the dried blood for a long time. What does that mean? Well, before, when something got broken, Slobad had to find new parts or repair the old ones in order to fix you up. Yes, I remember. Bosh slumped. But he cannot do that now. No, said the elf, but now he doesn't need to. You can fix yourself. Bosh looked puzzled. Gussa pointed to the scabs again. That dried blood is your flesh repairing itself. Bosh looked again and fingered the oldest scar. That was from several days ago. This healing takes a long time. Gussa nodded. Yes, it does. That's why you've got to be more careful about what you hit and what you let hit you. Bosh shook his head. I do not think I will ever get used to flesh.